Craig.
Hey, Craig.
Hi, Greg.
Hey, Craig.
Hi, Craig.
And hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Paddock. Today we're going to be bringing out our crystal balls and getting down to who's going to be on the podium. We're going to also cover what went down last year. And on the episode, we have Melissa, Ito, myself, Chelsea, KC, and LeAnne. And I'm going to start off by giving it to Ito, who's going to give us a little history lesson.
The Belgian GP, arguably the most iconic F1 race after the likes of Monaco and Monza, predating the inaugural World Championship season in 1950 by quite a bit. The 7.004 kilometer, aka 4.352 mile long Spa Grand Prix circuit has been the host venue for most editions of the GP itself. Known for its challenging 44-lap layout with corners like the very dangerous Eau Rouge and Radillon, the track is amidst the picturesque Ardennes forest and features a combination of high-speed straights and tricky corners, making it a favorite among drivers and fans alike. Over the years, the GP has witnessed numerous memorable moments and legendary battles. One of the most iconic and, dare I say, dramatic ones was the 98 race, where Michael Schumacher and Mika Hakkinen collided on the first lap, opening the doors for a surprise victory by Damon Hill. Sadly, the Belgian GP has also seen its fair share of tragedy, such as in 1960, a catastrophic accident claimed the lives of multiple spectators, leading to significant safety improvements at the circuit and in Formula One as a whole. In recent times, the circuit has seen the death of Antoine Hubert during the F2 race in 2019, and that of the Formula Regional European Championship driver Dilano van 't Hooft just this year. Despite these deaths and other incidents, the event continues to thrive and remain an essential fixture on the calendar, captivating motorsports enthusiasts with its history, challenging circuit, and unpredictable weather conditions, to the point where in 2021, the Grand Prix got the distinction of being the shortest race in F1 history after being red flagged after only 2 completed laps, which were also run behind a safety car, meaning that it was also the first race ever to never run under a full green flag. This all led to there being new rules put in place in case of this ever happening again regarding how a winner is determined and therefore how points are being awarded. In terms of the Belgian GP and its records, we have Schumacher winning it a record 6 times, Ferrari running away with it with an astounding 18 constructor wins. And finally, to illustrate just how difficult this circuit is, the fastest lap record, which is still held by Valtteri Bottas from 2018, is at 1 minute 46.286 seconds.
And now that we know a little bit about the track, I want to talk about last year's Grand Prix. So we're going to start off with Friday, practice races. And honestly, it was a lot of confusion. I got excited for Ferrari, but then I wasn't excited because then Mercedes was taking it, and then Mercedes was losing, and Red Bull was taking it. So you know what? It's common. The first practice, we had a 1-2 Ferrari finish in the rain, of course. I feel like that's where Ferrari kind of thrives sometimes, especially Carlos. And then in P2, we had Charles on top with Max going head to head. And I mean, literally Charles was just like within a second of Max, and Lando was rounding behind them. So he finished the top 3. And I like to think that that specific little trio could probably repeat that as a podium finish this year. Just saying. P3, which was the last session, was where we saw Sergio place in first, which honestly, if he did that again this year, would be good for him because, Danny. And then we had leading Max and Carlos for like a Red Bull 1-2 finish. We also saw a little tough moment for Charles. He ate some gravel and he did like a little spin and he banked into the barriers at turn 12. But he was still able to finish the race. They just had to call a red flag for a moment. And I mean, he ended P3 and 7th. So that's not horrible considering it's just a practice.
After practice, it only got a little bit more chaotic, as before the session even started, Verstappen, Leclerc, Norris, Ocon, Zhou, and Schumacher would all be receiving grid penalties because they had to take on new power unit components. Valtteri Bottas, however, managed to get a 20-place grid penalty no matter what because of the types and amounts of components that he took on. So in Q1, Verstappen proved to be the one to beat as he set the early target of 1 minute 44.581 seconds, with Sainz dropping to P2 by 0.469 seconds and Perez third by 0.796 seconds to leave Leclerc nearly a second off in P4. Mercedes struggled to warm their tires and started Q1 with flying laps that saw Russell go 10th and Hamilton 11th. There was still time for the whole field to improve, though neither the Red Bulls nor the Ferraris decided to chance a second run. With spits of rain reported through Eau Rouge, Russell rounded out the top 5 by 1.069 seconds, with Albon going 6th to split the Mercedes as Hamilton took P7. That left Norris 8th, Ricciardo dropping to P13 due to a track limit violation, which nowadays apparently you can't get enough of. In Q3, despite knowing that he would ultimately be demoted, Max went top with his first flying lap, a time of 1 minute 43.665 seconds, putting him 6/10 ahead of Sainz in P2. Perez then had his lap for P3 deleted for track limits. Leclerc completed his lap to take third place despite tire confusion. And after second runs were made, Verstappen decided to sit the end of qualifying out, probably because of the grid penalty, while Leclerc decided to take a chance, only to tow his teammate. But the execution might have been a bit lacking, as Sainz lost 3/10 in the first sector alone, and then lost even more time in sector 2, meaning he did not improve. Sainz would start on the pole position, having taken P2 in Q3 because of the Max's grid penalty, and Perez would join him on the front row, while Max would drop back to 15th and Charles to 16th for Sunday's race. Although Ocon rounded out the top 5, he would start the race in 17th, while 6th place qualifier Alonso takes 3rd on the grid. Hamilton joined Alonso in the second row, having qualified 7th ahead of Mercedes teammate Russell, with Albon beginning the race in 6th, having finished 9th on Saturday. By rounding out the top 10 in Q3, Norris would start 18th behind Ocon. So it was a bit of a chaotic qualifying, seeing as how, with all the grid penalties, no one really started where they actually finished in qualifying.
At the start of the race, we saw Carlos take the lead, all while Checo, who was starting behind, was overtaken by Fernando and both Mercedes drivers. However, with the use of DRS, Checo was able to use that slipstream and regain fourth position from George. At the same time, we saw Lewis try to do the same thing with Fernando, but ended up with the two colliding. Fernando was able to continue the race with minimal damage to his car, all while Lewis, on the other hand, lost water pressure in his car a few turns later and had to retire from the race. This was his first retirement of the season. All while this was going on, Max and Charles had managed to move up the grid to 8th and 9th by the end of the first lap. By the second lap, Latifi ran wide, coming out of Les Combes, and had touched Bottas during his spin. This caused Bottas to get beach and brought out a safety car. Once the race restarted, Max managed to work his way up the grid to first by the 12th lap. Max finished the race in his 9th victory of the season, with Checo behind, followed by Carlos, George in 4th, followed by Charles, who finished 5th, but was demoted to 6th due to receiving a penalty for speeding the pit lane, something we just saw last weekend. So Fernando ended up rounding out the top 5. Now that you know what you need to know about this track and last year's race, let's see what our crystal balls have to say about this week's race.
So, bringing up my crystal ball here. In first, I'm going to have to bet on Max. Yeah, I know it's a real safe choice. It is what it is. And at this point, I'm just going to be realistic when I do these things. Second, I'd like to bring in Carlos. I'm not going to be that realistic. Last year, we saw him come in 3rd on the podium. So maybe if he just keeps, being his own strategist, we can see him place 2nd again. And after the weekend we saw in Hungary, I'm betting my money that McLaren is going to be back with another podium finish. Although, wouldn't it be fun if we saw Oscar do it? I mean, he would probably end up in third. I'm okay with that. I want to see Oscar get a rookie podium finish. As for points, going down in order, I'm giving George, Charles, Ocon, Alonso, Alex, Lance, and Yuki. Alpine needs a comeback. I'm hoping something happens for them. Aston Martin can just start figuring it out because I'm missing Alonso like in the podium, let alone near it at this point. So I at least need him in the points. And I also think that George is like always going to aim high and get points. I believe in him. So I hope we get a nice clean race. I do think there was rain forecasted for this weekend. But other than that, I need us to ignore the need for a safety car on Sunday. I don't need a repeat of Lando.
While my predictions didn't really work for Hungary, I'm giving the dice another shot because representative sample and all that. Plus, it makes a somewhat predictable season fun. So, we have Lando P1. I mean, he's been on the podium twice in a row now, and the McLaren is truly cooking, so why shouldn't he win? P2, Nico. Well, the dice says the podium curse is finally broken. While he definitely deserves it, because he's been driving the wheels off that Haas, I have to say I will believe it when I see it. And to round out the top three, we have Oscar. And the dice really seems to love him and McLaren in general, as last week it was predicted that he would win. All I'm going to say at this point, it is plausible. As for the rest of the top 10, we have Zhou, Magnussen, Sargent, Hamilton, Leclerc, Alonso, and Perez. And to be honest, all I can think when I saw those predictions was no Max. That would be definitely interesting. Honestly, after the dominating season that he's had so far, it would be kind of a nice change of pace. Though, to be fair, the only way I truly see this happening is with him DNFing, and that seems very unlikely with the rocket ship that Red Bull is.
And for me, I'm kind of keeping with the status quo with predicting another Max win. But at this point, I'm hoping that he can actually break Sebastian Vettel's record of 9 wins in a row. He's super close. He's only 2 races away from tying, and he would tie it at Zandvoort, which would be pretty cool. So that would be pretty exciting to see. And then I'm also hoping that the McLaren's resurgent wasn't a fluke, and would love to see both of them, Lando and Oscar, on the podium this weekend. I mean, Oscar's been so close for the past 2 races, having been in the top 5 both times. So we also need to give the broadcast team another chance to catch the infamous Lando champagne celebration on camera. They've missed it 2 times in a row now, and, keep up with what the people want. And could we potentially even see a surprise Lando win? He does seem to thrive in wet conditions, so anything is possible. And only Michael Schumacher and Charles Leclerc have taken their maiden win at this circuit in the past 30 years, so perhaps we could add another name to that. I'm also hoping both Astons are able to finish in the points again, and like Chelsea, I miss the Fernando podiums, but with the way the pace is, it's not looking like they'll be able to get there until they bring new upgrades. And I'm also just hoping that Ferrari can just please not mess up for one race. That would be great. We would love to see it. But the main thing I'm actually hoping for is a safe weekend for everyone involved, seeing as how the weather forecast is looking pretty rainy for the entire weekend. And that hopefully race control will be on top of all the flagging, and that we can have a fun but safe race weekend.
Well, it's the last race before summer break, so might as well go out with a bang, or not, with these predictions. Tale as told as time, Max will most likely win the Grand Prix. It's being realistic at this point. It's kind of just, all right, he's going to win. So let's just get into it for the rest of the grid. I would like, again, to see one of the Ferrari or Mercedes drivers up there. in P2 or P3 in general. Probably for P3, I want a wild card, someone different that we haven't seen up there, and to give us some great topics to talk about in our recap episode too. So for the sake of craziness, maybe Oscar, Pierre, Alex up there on the podium. It's well overdue. It'd be great to see a rookie this year finish out in the top 3. And we know how great Oscar has been doing this season. And as for the rest, I would want to see Danny and Logan finish in the points. I've been cheering for our lone American driver to finish up in the points, and I know it's close. I just don't know when it's going to happen. And overall, like Casey has said, I just want an exciting race where the craziness continues after the first turn and when Max takes the lead. And for the sake of Alpine in general, I just want both drivers to finish out this weekend because 2 back-to-back DNFs hurt, and I would hate to see a 3-peat with that. So let's see what happens.
So, for other topics that came up during the week, we have Alfa Romeo that is going to drive a special livery at Spa to showcase their collaboration with Kick, which is basically a Amazon-owned rival to Twitch. And honestly, when I first saw the pictures, I was like, did someone forget the flow vids on that car? Because while, yes, I understand Kick's logo being like a fluorescent green, they were going to go with fluorescent green accents, but it just kind of threw me off, especially on the front wing. But anyone else got any thoughts?
I'm looking at the picture that you had posted, Ito, and the green paint just reminds me of like what they use during testing to see how like the aerodynamics are going. It's also giving me like some people might know what this is or have heard of it, or like Dayglow vibes with that green, fluorescent green, life in color, whatever that festival is nowadays. But that's the 2 things that's giving me: Dayglow and testing.
For me, seeing that the poster they just released has like a Minecraft theme, it honestly looks like the car just ran over a creeper and like, creeper roadkill all over the front because it's bright neon green. It's also giving like the Nickelodeon slime vibe to it, but it's definitely an interesting choice. I don't know why specifically this race, but it's always fun to see a new addition to a livery.
Yeah, and I mean, that wasn't the only thing that cropped up this week because it kind of started developing last week during the lead up to Hungary, but this week it truly kicked off was Helmut Marko's role at Red Bull came under scrutiny from other teams because, as you might know, Helmut Marko used to be the lead person of Red Bull's junior driver program. Like, he developed talents like Ricardo, Sainz, Vettel, Verstappen. If they made a name for themselves at Red Bull, he found them. But his contract with the junior program got terminated, and he's not part of the cost cap anymore because of that. But he admitted ahead of Hungary that he still has a contract with Red Bull, but what that contract is very unclear. And because Red Bull has been under scrutiny in general due to their domination, a lot of teams have requested an investigation into Helmut Marko's relationship with Red Bull and what his role is, whether it falls under the cost cap, etc. And honestly, with how they broke the cost cap last year and how they're basically admitting, I mean, Horner can be found saying they don't really care about the cost cap, it just brings up a lot of question in not just my mind, but also a lot of other people's minds. It's going to be interesting how that unfolds during silly season or even later into the season. And then, last thing from me, the F1 meeting will be ahead of Spa, and some of the topics on the docket are rather interesting, such as engine equalization at Alpine's request, the 2024 tires with or without thermal blankets. For those of you that don't know, thermal blankets have come under scrutiny in recent years due to F1's drive to become more sustainable. And then technical standards of the gearbox, financial regulations such as a potential increase of the budget cap. Because as we've talked about on here, Red Bull broke it last year. Currently, there are 3 teams under scrutiny for likely breaking it this year. So is it even worth it? Who knows? And then, of course, the format and dates of the 2024 calendar sprint weekends.
So the engine equalization is actually a pretty interesting concept. It would basically allow teams like Alpine, who currently are about 30 horsepower behind everyone else, like the engine suppliers on the grid right now, would allow them to be able to kind of catch up even with the current power unit freeze. And Red Bull and Christian Horner have even come out in favor of this, which is kind of fitting in a way, as Red Bull's actually the reason why we have the engine freeze in the first place. Because when Honda pulled out of being a manufacturer in 2021, even though they kind of didn't, but they did, basically meant that Red Bull would be on their own without a manufacturer to help develop their own engine for this current regulation. Which would be an unfair advantage to all the other teams, which was one of the reasons why they put in this engine freeze, and that they could only make updates for reliability, not for power unit performance. But as with everything else, some teams make better updates than others to their engines. And so Renault and Alpine have kind of fallen behind on that. And so this engine equalization would at least allow them to catch up to kind of like the better engines on the grid and kind of equal out at least the engine aspect. Of course, like the aero and everything would still remain completely different between the teams, but at least they'd be running on similar powered engines, which would hopefully try to bridge the gap between, Red Bull and everyone else.
So has anyone seen the recent ad from Heineken with Max Verstappen in it? Someone needs to give him an Oscar for his little part in there. So essentially, it's just your basic drink responsibly ad, where we see a group of friends, they pull up their, I'm assuming, to their local pub, and someone puts out their key in the middle for them to essentially pick their DD, and they're like, okay, who's the best driver? And you just see the camera pan from person to person, and it ends up to Max, and they're like, no, you're like the best driver, blah blah blah, like, and Max is just like, okay, whatever. And then you just see like the next few scenes being different nights out, and they're like, here's the keys, and Max is like, okay. And it gets to the point where he's just like over it. Mind you, the cars that he's driving as DD is like terrible cars compared to his like nice whatever sports car he's got. And like the look on his face and everything, like you can tell he's like embarrassed. Like he drives by a bus full of like girls that looks like your little bachelorette party and everything, and he's just like, oh my god. And it just ends to one scene where like the group of friends are leaving with their DD, and you see Max and the nice car, and Max just lifts up his little bottle of non-alcoholic beer and points to the 0.0%. I thought it was nice because you see someone in the sport of driving encouraging responsible drinking, obviously don't drink and drive, and you can still have non-alcoholic beer as an alternative. But definitely check it out if you haven't. It's fun to watch. I liked it.
I will say, Max did a way better job than Carlos and Charles did when Ferrari had them doing commercials for the gas station. I was actually impressed with Max. Good acting.
I mean, he's kind of known to be a good actor because that Heineken ad unearthed, at least on TikTok, a few other ads that he did when he was at like Toro Rosso or early Red Bull days that were, I want to say, slightly more embarrassing, but he was still pulling it off.
Yeah, honestly, the Max Heineken team up is pretty perfect because it's a Dutch beer brand, and he is Dutch. And then also, I think with this, they also have something called like Player Zero, which is like a playoff of the like zero with the non-alcoholic beer, which is basically trying to get people into sim racing, which is what Max does when he's not racing an F1 car. So it's kind of like the perfect partnership there. And I guess it's always just kind of fun to see F1 drivers not in their usual environment and having to do things that typically wouldn't see.
I don't know how accurate this is, but I was reading an article about the ad that said that Heineken or like whoever is in charge of like casting for these commercials, they were just like, whoever like wants to volunteer and be part of it. And like Max was one of the ones that volunteered. Again, I don't know how accurate it is, Because in my mind, I was like, okay, I feel like Max, you gotta like convince to do something like this, unless if he was just like, okay, yeah, it's a
Nah,
Dutch beer, let's do
they
it.
needed to make that budget enough for him. So, yeah, there's a budget. There's no way he just volunteered.
Yeah, no, of course. But I guess like essentially not like volunteer, like obviously not get paid, but like volunteer to do the ad itself. But again, LeAnne brings a very big point, budget. That man was getting big bucks just for like 30-second, 1 minute thing where he doesn't even talk. So, but I thought it was cute.
Fun fact, commercials are like the best money you can make. I just thought I'd share that. I have a friend that did a commercial and he's probably made more money from the commercial than he ever did on any like movie or show he booked. Fun fact.
I just wanted to bring this up because I was talking about this with someone and I started thinking, I was like, I don't really know too much about the upgrades that Red Bull brought in. So I tried doing some research because, I mean, Max didn't get pole on Saturday. He lost it to Lewis, and I was wondering, is it because of the upgrades that came in that maybe he's still getting used to them for this race that was for the quali that was happening? Or was it because of the tire rotation that they were trying to pull with quali, and that's like why we saw Haas so high up there? And this was a KC question.
Yeah, so I think I've heard in a couple interviews is that Red Bull actually tends to set up their car more for race pace, so for race weekends on Sunday, than they do for qualifying. It's a very different format because in qualifying, you're just trying to get one good lap in, not, having to take tires 40 laps or something. It's like you can burn them up as much as you want. You can like take it to the limit as much as you want. I mean, we've seen people hit walls, track limits, all that kind of thing. And so typically Red Bull will focus on the actual race because they can. Because even if they don't qualify high, they can easily make that up during the race. Whereas sometimes, like if you see teams like Ferrari and Charles, he does really, really good in qualifying because they can set up their car really well for that, but then they miss out on the race pace in the actual like Sunday race. So a lot of times it's affected by the car setup and also the fact that some of the other teams have made improvements. But I mean, Lewis got that pole by a very, very, very small margin, which is hopeful, I guess, that for the other teams that there is someone who can catch Red Bull. But earlier in the season, Red Bull was claiming poles by like a much, much further amount. But Red Bull can also just kind of afford to take risks like that with changes in setups and kind of how they set up the car. But I think Max mentioned in one of the post-race interviews that the car was like one of the best setups he's had for the race. So if he gave feedback in one of the practice sessions, like, I like this setup, don't touch this setup, this is perfect, they probably were fine with him just keeping that for qualifying. And then it worked for the race. So, but yeah, it's super complicated because teams have to kind of weigh what kind of session do we think can we do the best in. Especially, and even when like sprint weekends, like this weekend's a sprint weekend. So you also have to factor in, there's an entire another race that we have to deal with. So the mechanics have their work cut out for them.
Thank you. That actually answered the conversation I was having this weekend.
Glad to help.
So we got some exciting news today in regards to the F1 Academy. All F1 teams, yes, all 10 of them, will have F1 Academy drivers in liveries for the 2024 season. This is really exciting news, and hopefully this brings some opportunity for some live broadcasting and just to be easier to follow up with and everything.
I mean, I love the idea. Don't get me wrong. But there are more than 10 drivers on the F1 Academy. And basically, because the F1 teams pick one driver each, to me, like, while I love it, I don't love that some girls will be left out, or there is potential for some girls to be left out. And that to me just kind of screams favoritism. I don't know. Just me, maybe.
So related to that, they have come out saying that it's not just the 10 teams, like 10 drivers, one for each like F1 team. They're also going to be like 5 additional entries that they said they're going to announce like at a later date, which I'm assuming is going to be like High Tech, Prima, like some of the teams that they already have, because they're obviously they have the space 4 more teams. But you're not the only person that thought that, because they quickly came out with being like, hey, it's not just these 10 spots. There are more. Do not worry. But it'll be interesting to see kind of where some of the current drivers, like teams they would potentially end up with, like which drivers the F1 teams would choose to, I guess, represent them. Because not all of the drivers are currently linked with like an F1 team. They're linked with some of like the F2 and F3 teams. So it'll be kind of interesting to see when that will be announced. Will that be a part of like this year's silly season, or kind of how they go about doing that?
As you guys know by now, we like to do like the pre-outro situation where we pick a fun fact, driver, etc. And for this week, we want to do who's going to be the star of the weekend. And honestly, as predictable as it might sound for Spa, I'm going to say the event of the weekend is going to be the rain. Just because it's known to be such a rainy circuit. And it's Belgium in the summer, which its weather is just unpredictable. Plus, the rain, especially at Spa, makes things exciting, I want to say, even though we've had some tragedies happen in rainy weather Spa.
I cannot wait to find out if this will be a relaxing Spa weekend. Really, like all the other girls, I'm just hoping for a safe one, to be honest. What are your weekend predictions? Let us know on our socials. Everywhere we are at Paddock Girls Podcast, except for Twitter. There you can find us at Paddock Girls Pod. And don't forget, since it's race weekend, and I'm too superstitious, you will see my special little race segment on TikTok where I let the podium filter predict for me. All right, love you all. Thanks for joining us in the paddock. We will see you after Spa. Bye, Craig.
See ya, Craig.
Bye, Craig.
Bye, Craig.
Hi, Craig.